I wasn't even invited to my own grandmother's will reading. My aunt said I didn't deserve to be there because I was ungrateful. I sat at home, replaying every memory of Grandma and wondering how my family could betray me like this. But what they didn't know. Grandma had left behind a secret, and when her lawyer revealed it, every greedy smile on their faces disappeared. In that moment, justice hit harder than they ever imagined. If you've ever been underestimated, cut out, or treated like you don't belong, this story is for you. Hit that like button, subscribe, and stick around, because you're about to hear one of the most satisfying family revenge stories ever told. Growing up, my family had this unspoken hierarchy, and I was always near the bottom of it. On paper, we looked picture perfect: holiday photos with fake smiles, birthday dinners where everyone pretended to care, and group hugs that were more for the camera than for love. But beneath all that, there was a quiet cruelty, and my aunt was the one who orchestrated most of it. Aunt Carol wasn't just controlling, she was manipulative in a way that made people believe her version of events even when reality screamed otherwise. She had this sharp smile, the kind that looked warm to outsiders but always felt like a warning to me. If she said I was ungrateful, suddenly the whole family treated me like I was some spoiled brat who didn't deserve kindness. And the worst part? No one ever questioned her. Grandma was the one exception. She was soft-spoken, the kind of woman whose presence calmed a storm. When I was little, I'd sit at her kitchen table while she baked pies from scratch, her hands dusted in flour, her eyes twinkling as she told me stories from her childhood. With her, I didn't feel invisible. She never demanded I act a certain way to earn her affection, she just gave it freely. But even then, Aunt Carol found ways to wedge herself into that bond. I still remember the Thanksgiving when Grandma gave me a little locket she'd worn in her youth. It wasn't expensive, just a simple gold oval with a faded photo of her and Grandpa inside. I was over the moon, clutching it like it was treasure. But Aunt Carol leaned over and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Don't get too attached. Grandma's just sentimental. Real gifts go to people who appreciate them." Everyone laughed. I smiled through it, but inside, my stomach sank. I didn't understand why she always needed to paint me as unworthy. That became the pattern. If Grandma asked me to help in the garden, Aunt Carol would say, "She doesn't know the first thing about hard work." If I bought Grandma a birthday gift, she'd mutter, "Last minute," just like everything else with her. Slowly, my cousins absorbed those jabs until they became part of their own vocabulary. They looked at me the same way Aunt Carol did, as if I was a disappointment they had to tolerate. Still, Grandma never wavered. She'd squeeze my hand when she saw me shrinking under their remarks. Sometimes she'd whisper, "Don't let them change you, sweetheart. I know who you are." And in those moments, I believed her. Looking back, I think Aunt Carol hated that bond most of all. She couldn't control it, couldn't spin it to her advantage. And so she worked harder to paint me as ungrateful, the word that would later become their excuse to erase me from Grandma's will reading. At the time, I didn't know how deep that scheme would run. All I knew was that in a family obsessed with appearances, I was the one they chose to cut out. The first time I realized something was wrong, it wasn't because anyone told me directly. It was because of silence. Weeks after Grandma's funeral, I noticed chatter in the family group chat, my cousins buzzing with excitement, tossing around words like meeting, big day, and finally. I scrolled through the messages, frowning. No one had mentioned what this big day was supposed to be. So I texted, "What's going on?" No response. The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared. Minutes ticked by. Finally, a message popped up, but it wasn't in the group. It was from Aunt Carol. "You don't need to worry about the will reading. It doesn't concern you." I stared at the screen, rereading the words until my vision blurred. My palms grew clammy. Surely, this was a mistake. I typed back, "Why wouldn't it concern me? I'm Grandma's granddaughter." The dots blinked for a long time before her reply came, "Because you were always ungrateful. Grandma wanted her estate to go to those who appreciated her. You never did." My chest tightened, a sharp pressure like someone was sitting on it. I wanted to scream that it wasn't true, that I loved Grandma, that I'd been there for her when no one else bothered to visit. But my fingers froze above the keyboard. I knew if I tried to defend myself, she'd twist my words, just like always. Instead, I just sat there, my heart pounding in my ears. A few hours later, I checked the group chat again. This time, my cousins were joking about who'd get Grandma's car, her jewelry, even her house. One of them wrote, Guess, my name, won't be needing anything. Makes it easier for us, lol. The laughter emoji stung more than the words themselves. They weren't just excluding me, they were mocking me. I dropped my phone onto the couch and pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes. My throat burned as I tried to hold back tears, but they slipped through anyway. It wasn't about the money. It was about being erased. About them deciding I wasn't worthy of having a seat at the table where my own grandmother's legacy was being decided. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed every moment Aunt Carol had belittled me in front of Grandma. Every smirk, every jab. It was as if she'd been planting seeds for years, watering them with whispers until my cousins believed I was some selfish, ungrateful disappointment. And now, those seeds had grown into the perfect excuse to cut me out completely. I wanted to call the lawyer, to demand answers. But a voice in my head kept whispering, what if she's right? What if Grandma really thought you were ungrateful? That thought sliced deeper than anything Aunt Carol could have said. And in that darkness, I didn't know what hurt more, losing my family, or believing, even for a second, that maybe they were right about me. The day of the will reading felt heavier than a funeral. Even the sky looked gray, as though it knew something was wrong. I woke up early, restless, pacing the floor like I had somewhere to be, except I wasn't invited. Meanwhile, my family gathered at the law office downtown. I wasn't there, but I could imagine it vividly, because I knew them. My cousins probably strutted in wearing their best clothes, whispering about who'd get what. Aunt Carol, no doubt, had her arms crossed, projecting that smug authority she wore like perfume. And my uncle? He would sit there, pretending to be solemn, but his eyes would betray him, darting toward the lawyer's briefcase like it was a treasure chest. Back at home, I sat on the couch staring at my phone. Every minute felt like an hour. I kept refreshing the group chat, half hoping someone would slip up and send a message, but it was silent. Too silent. I tried distracting myself. Made coffee. Cleaned the kitchen. Opened one of Grandma's old recipe books that I'd kept, running my fingers over her handwriting in the margins. But the longer I sat there, the more the anger bubbled beneath my grief. I pictured them all in that office, acting like they were entitled to her life's work. None of them had visited her during her last months. Not really. They'd sent flowers, sure, but they didn't sit with her through the long afternoons when she just wanted company. They didn't hear her stories over lukewarm tea. I did. And yet here I was, locked out like I didn't matter. At the law office, the tension must have been thick. I imagined the lawyer, Mr. Harris, a calm man with graying hair, unfolding the will slowly, his voice steady. I knew him. Grandma trusted him like family. Aunt Carol probably leaned forward in her chair, already calculating how much of the estate would be hers. Let's begin, I imagined him saying, clearing his throat. Maybe he started with formalities, but I could picture the way my cousins squirmed impatiently, their smiles tight, rehearsed. One of them probably whispered, bet I get the car, earning a sharp look from Aunt Carol. Meanwhile, my phone stayed quiet. No updates. Not a single word. It was like I'd been erased not just from the will, but from the family itself. Finally, after hours of pacing, my phone buzzed. My heart jumped. It wasn't the group chat, it was a private number. I answered, my voice unsteady. Hello? On the other end, a calm but urgent voice replied, this is Mr. Harris, your grandmother's lawyer. I need you to come into the office. Now. My stomach dropped. My first thought was panic. Had something gone wrong? Why was he calling me at all if I wasn't supposed to be involved? My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. What is this about? I asked. There was a pause. Then his voice softened. It's about your grandmother's will. There's something you need to see for yourself. And just like that, the walls I'd built around my grief cracked wide open. When I hung up the phone with Mr. Harris, my entire body buzzed with nervous electricity. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely grab my car keys. I didn't even bother changing out of the hoodie and jeans I'd been pacing around in all day. My mind was racing with questions I couldn't answer. Why was he calling me? Had there been a mistake? Or worse, was Aunt Carol right all along, and I was about to be humiliated in some new way? The drive to the office felt endless. Every red light mocked me, every car in front of me moved too slow. My knuckles whitened around the steering wheel, and at one point, I realized I'd been holding my breath without noticing. I kept whispering under my breath, please, Grandma. Please don't have forgotten me. When I finally pulled into the parking lot, I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the office building. My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I forced myself to open the door, my legs heavy, as though gravity had doubled. The receptionist barely looked up as I told her my name. "Mr. Harris is expecting you," she said, gesturing toward a door at the end of the hall. The moment I pushed it open, every eye turned toward me. There they were. My cousins, slouched in expensive clothes, their smug faces turning into confusion. My uncle, brows furrowed. And Aunt Carol, oh, Aunt Carol. Her smile froze the instant she saw me, her jaw tightening. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I swallowed hard, forcing myself not to shrink back. "Mr. Harris asked me to come." Her face flushed red, a flicker of panic breaking through her mask. "That's ridiculous. You're not part of this." Mr. Harris, seated calmly at the head of the table, adjusted his glasses. "Actually, Carol," he said evenly, "she very much is." The room went still. I slid into a chair at the far end of the table, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. The air was thick with hostility, but underneath it all, I could feel something else: anticipation. Mr. Harris cleared his throat. "As you all know, your mother revised her will prior to her passing. What you don't know is that she also recorded her intentions on video to prevent any misunderstandings." Gasps echoed around the table. My cousins exchanged nervous glances. Aunt Carol's lips curled in a sneer. "A video? Since when does she?" Since she no longer trusted everyone here to honor her wishes, Mr. Harris cut her off firmly. My pulse pounded in my ears. He continued, his voice steady. "Per your grandmother's instructions, the estate does not go to multiple heirs. It goes to one." A hush fell. Everyone leaned forward, hungry, desperate. Mr. Harris paused just long enough for the tension to strangle the room. Then he looked directly at me. "The sole heir," he said clearly, "is you." My breath caught in my throat. Aunt Carol shot to her feet, slamming her hands on the table. "What?" And in that moment, I felt the air shift. Everything they thought they knew about Grandma, and about me, was about to collapse. For a moment, no one breathed. The lawyer's words hung in the air like a thunderclap that refused to fade. "The sole heir is you." My ears rang, and my body felt weightless, as though I'd been yanked out of reality. Then chaos erupted. My cousins started talking all at once, their voices overlapping in a storm of disbelief. "This has to be a mistake. She barely even visited Grandma. There's no way she left everything to her." And then Aunt Carol's voice cut through it all, shrill and furious. "I won't accept this." She slammed her fist against the table so hard the coffee cups rattled. Her face was blotchy red, her eyes narrowed to slits as she pointed at me. "You don't deserve a cent of her money. You're ungrateful, selfish, a disappointment. My mother would never." "Actually, she would," Mr. Harris interrupted calmly, pulling a thick envelope from his briefcase. "And she did. I have a notarized will, signed and dated. But more importantly," he reached for a small remote and clicked a button. The room fell silent as the wall-mounted TV flickered to life. And then, there she was. Grandma. My heart lurched. She sat in her favorite chair, her silver hair neatly brushed, her hands folded in her lap. Her voice, though frail, was steady. "If you're watching this," she began, "it means I've passed on. And if my family is gathered together, then it means I have something important to say." She paused, her eyes soft but piercing. "For too long, I've watched as some of you twisted love into obligation, and respect into control. I cannot reward greed. I cannot reward cruelty." Aunt Carol's face drained of color. Grandma smiled faintly. My granddaughter was the only one who sat with me without asking for anything in return. She laughed with me, listened to my stories, and reminded me what unconditional love feels like. To her, I leave everything: my home, my accounts, and the responsibility of honoring our family name the right way. Tears blurred my vision. My hands flew to my mouth as I heard her say, "I know this will upset some of you, but my decision is final. To those who feel wronged, I ask you this: did you give me love freely, or only when you thought it would benefit you?" The screen went black. The silence that followed was deafening. My cousins slumped in their seats, pale and stunned. Aunt Carol, however, shook with rage. "She was manipulated," she screeched, pointing a trembling finger at me. You tricked her. You poisoned her against us. I finally spoke, my voice trembling but sharp.
No, Aunt Carol.
You did that all by yourself. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Mr. Harris gathered the documents neatly and said, "This will is ironclad. If anyone wishes to contest it, I assure you, they'll lose." For the first time in years, I felt the power shift.
And Aunt Carol knew it.
Walking out of that lawyer's office, I felt like the air itself had changed. For the first time in years, I wasn't the powerless one at the table. Aunt Carol had always controlled the narrative, but now
I held the pen.
Still, inheriting everything didn't feel like the triumph my cousins thought it would. As I stood in Grandma's house for the first time after the reading, the silence pressed down on me. Her photos lined the mantel, her knitting basket sat in the corner, her scent still lingered faintly, lavender and vanilla. I sank into her favorite armchair and whispered, "What do I do with all this, Grandma? How do I honor you without becoming like them?"
That's when I found the notebook.
Tucked away in her desk drawer, beneath stacks of old letters, was a worn leather journal. Inside, she had listed the charities she supported quietly, the food pantry she donated to, the scholarship fund for single mothers, the envelopes of cash she sometimes slipped to struggling neighbors.
She'd never told anyone, not even me.
Reading her words, I felt her presence so strongly it brought me to tears. She hadn't wanted her legacy to be about greed.
She wanted it to be about kindness. And that's when the idea struck me.
If my family wanted a piece of the inheritance so badly, they could have it, but only on Grandma's terms. Only if they proved they were capable of more than selfishness. I worked with Mr. Harris to set up a foundation in Grandma's name. Every cent of her money would be managed through it. I would oversee how it was distributed, and yes, my relatives could benefit, but under strict conditions. Cousins who wanted financial support for school or business ventures. They'd have to volunteer at least 200 hours a year in community service, not just writing checks, but showing up.
Serving food at the pantry. Cleaning shelters.
Reading to kids. Aunt Carol? Her condition was the hardest. If she ever wanted access to even a fraction of the estate, she'd have to publicly acknowledge the truth, that she lied, manipulated, and tried to erase me.
She would have to stand in front of the whole family and apologize.
Not just to me, but to Grandma's memory. The more I laid out these terms, the lighter my chest felt.
It wasn't about punishing them, though part of me relished the thought of seeing their faces.
It was about revealing who they really were when kindness came with no shortcuts. I could already picture it, my cousins rolling their eyes at the thought of manual labor, Aunt Carol choking on her pride.
And me?
I wouldn't need to lift a finger.
The conditions themselves would expose them.
For once, I wasn't the ungrateful one. I was the gatekeeper of Grandma's true legacy. And they were about to find out just how high the price of their greed really was. At first, they laughed at my conditions. 200 hours of community service, one cousin scoffed. That's slave labor. Another whined, why should we scrub floors when the money's already ours? And Aunt Carol, oh, she nearly fainted when she read her requirement. You expect me to humiliate myself in front of everyone? To admit lies that never happened, she snapped, her voice trembling with fury. Yes, I said simply. That's the price of Grandma's legacy. Weeks passed, and the cracks began to show. My cousins signed up for service hours, thinking they could cheat the system, posting staged photos of themselves helping at soup kitchens before ducking out early. But the foundation required proof, verified by the charities themselves. Within a month, reports rolled in.
They weren't showing up. They weren't doing the work.
When Mr. Harris informed them their requests for money were denied, the screaming phone calls started.
This isn't fair, they shouted.
You're ruining everything.
Aunt Carol held out the longest.
She tried to rally the family, spinning new lies about how I manipulated Grandma. But the video message from Grandma was ironclad, and the more she fought, the more pathetic she looked.
Finally, cornered, she called me. Her voice was a broken whisper.
Please, just this once.
Don't make me do it.
You don't understand how hard it is.
I did understand. That was the point.
I'm not making you do anything, I told her softly. Grandma is.
She never apologized. And so, she never got a penny. Meanwhile, the foundation thrived.
The pantry expanded, scholarships were given, families were fed. For the first time, I saw Grandma's name on the lips of strangers, spoken with gratitude, not greed. One evening, I visited her grave. I laid fresh flowers down and whispered, "They tried to erase me, Grandma.
But you saw me.
And because of you, I've built something that will outlive all of us." The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of lavender. And for the first time since she passed, I felt at peace.
My family lost everything they schemed for.
And I gained the only thing that mattered, the power to turn Grandma's love into something unbreakable. In the end, revenge didn't come from taking everything for myself. It came from making sure Grandma's love lived on in ways money never could. My family's greed destroyed them, but her legacy built hope for people who truly needed it.
And honestly,
that's the sweetest justice of all. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, what's the most satisfying family karma you've ever seen play out? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about standing up to toxic relatives, setting boundaries, and finding strength where others least expect it. Until next time, protect your peace.